I think that we're always in agreements, even when we're not in agreement. And so I think that some people would say it's a nervous system level, but I would say on a frequency or vibration level, that we sense one another and that we sense where the other person needs or wants us to be at that moment. And if we have still a lot of untouched experiences around power and domination and control within us, we will experience that person projecting us. Let's say they project us, or in their movie, we're the smaller one and they're the bigger one. We might very easily slip into that without meaning to, and then find ourselves there, much to our dismay, and out of our control to climb out of it. And the desire to climb out of it might make us fight, or might make us get smaller or be more diminutive, but there's a way that we're in reaction to that. And I would say we're in reaction to it because of our accumulated experiences that have been distorted around what power really is and who and what holds it. And so I think this abandoning of oneself to too much power or to too little power is the dance we've been groomed into that makes us feel unnaturally fearful and vulnerable of one another.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman. I'm a psychiatrist. I study meaningful coincidences, synchronicity, serendipity. It's really a lot of fun, and it just keeps going. There's so much more stuff to learn about them, and particularly about how they tell us about our own minds and how we're connected to other minds and how we're connected to our environment. Those are some of the basic lessons of synchronicity. And tell a little story that that our guest Bree Greenberg might also comment on. But as at the Science of Consciousness conference in Tucson in April of 2024, my colleague and I sat down in the front row of a presentation, and then she began talking with the person next to her. Turned out that the person next to her was Sky Nelson Isaac, who's written 2 synchronicity books. Okay, well, that's nice. But I've known him for years on Zoom and a lot more by email. And this is the first time we actually saw each other in person. And it's such a surprise. The guy was a lot taller than I ever expected him to be. And I see some people who are a lot shorter than I expect them to be. You just don't get that perspective. And we were both delighted to have that 3D biofield connection by a coincidence of sitting down right next to each other. It was delightful. So please subscribe to this channel and like it. It really helps the algorithm to get it out there to other people, to let them know about meaningful coincidences, and send a comment in. I like to respond to comments people send in, and critical ones as well as complimentary ones or informative ones. So please consider sending us a comment. And there's my book, Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. I based a lot of what I talk about on those books, on that book, and so I'm writing another one, and I'm working on another one. I mean, it just keeps going because there's so much more to learn about meaningful coincidences. And we will learn a little bit more about them today with our guest, Bree Greenberg. And Bree is, among other things, an LMFT, and she has a passion for creating individual, organizational, and global liberatory change. She's a change maker. She is founder of the former Vermont Center for Integrative Therapy, which opened in 2010 and was one of the first mental health centers to combine ancient systems of healing interwoven with current cutting-edge systems of healthcare. She is known for her dynamic speaking presence, as you will see, and her ability to weave disparate elements together into new forms that change conversation and care. She's an adjunct faculty member at Dartmouth Medical School and has spoken extensively at institutions and universities around the world. Bree, welcome to Connecting with Coincidence.
Thank you. I'm so excited to chat with you because you're so much fun.
I think somebody told you that.
I can feel it. I
Oh,
can.
you
They did also tell me.
they also tell you that, but you can feel it. You can pick it up.
Mhm.
Well, let's have some fun with a coincidence story that has something to do with being in the bathtub.
I mean, it was hard actually for me when you asked me to like pull out a coincidence story. It was hard for me to find one that felt meaningful enough to use, which actually is funny because they're all meaningful enough. So that part alone was really interesting. But this one sticks out for me because it led to so much change in my life. So back in 2015, a lot had changed that particular year of my life. So there was a lot of what most of us would term kind of stress or pressure in my life. And in March of that year, I had sat like a 9-day monastic silent retreat. And at the end of that retreat, the nun who was one of the two people hosting the retreat had said to me, be very, very careful. She was like, because you are practicing on the edge, and on the edge means that you can fall to either side. And of course, after a 9-day retreat, you're fairly like, you can tell somebody anything and they're like, okay. And so pretty much I was like, okay. And then I left there and just went about my life, figuring everything was fine. And she gave me the red string and all was good. And then in November of that year, we wound up pulling my daughter out of school to begin homeschooling her. And I was in the bath about a week before I was supposed to attend a second retreat of the year. And as I was thumbing through like a magazine, there was some article in there that had to do with sitting retreats and stress. I don't even remember. It was so unimportant what the article said, but it was something about the tenor of it that kind of flipped my switch around going to the retreat versus staying home. And so I went, and on that retreat, I had probably the most life altering experience, other than having a child, that I have had in this particular lifetime. And it completely changed my entire course. And I've thought many times, like, if I had not attended that retreat, would the same thing have happened? And I'm pretty convinced that it would have, just maybe in a different form or a little bit later, because it seemed inexorable that that experience was going to happen for me regardless.
Do you believe in coincidences?
I do, because I believe in patterns. And so to me, coincidences are parts of like patterns or gatherings of energy. So yes.
Please expand.
Uh, when I see reality or relationships within reality, and what I mean by perceive them in both real time and in vision, what I see is these networks with nexus points between them, many, many, many of them. And there's lots of things gathered in and around and through those nexus points. And they're always moving and changing between those nexus points. But to me, coincidences have to do with that gathering. Like you are drawn to a particular place or a particular thing that is part of that nexus point at that particular time. And then it either draws you even further in or to other connections within the same pattern or space.
It seems from that description, you are seeing a web or
Yeah.
webs.
Yes.
And that web reminds me of Indra's net.
Yeah. I didn't know anything about that until like the fifth person told me that. And I was like, I better find out what that is. And when I looked at it, I was like, oh, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Well, what is Indra's net to you, and how do you mean it? That's it.
Well, Indra's net to me is just the whole like expanse of ecosystemic reality, like the thing that underlies it. And so the connections or the intersectionality of everything many, many times over. And what I see when I look at it is that it's not just like a horizontal net, but one that is enfolded on itself many times over in many different fractals. And to me, just because of my Taoist and dream experience, to me, what it looks like is just the dream. It looks like the base of the dream. The like if you were to see behind it, that's what you would see.
And the way that you describe it, webs tend to be look like they're flat. At least spider webs are, but you've got a three-dimensional view of that web from what I saw. Not only are things enfolded, because Indra's net talks about those points of meeting, also having nets that are connected to it, which are connected to it. It's a little hard for us humans to conceptualize the multiple interlocking, interweaving of those nets. I can do a circle, I'm in a sphere, and then go deeper into it. But how do you, can you translate your own visual of what you're describing?
I can try. I mean, it looks like a sphere to me as well, but it also just looks like places that are beacons. So those nodal points to me look like beacons or gathering spaces of light. And then between them are many, many different threads that connect to other threads, but that because it is so multifaceted and so folded in many ways, that those beacons, which could seem far away, could actually touch one another in the quantum space of touching, because even though they may visually appear far, nothing is actually a distance at that level or that register.
Well, it begins to sound like the time and space thing ain't around in that thing. And that's that's quantum thinking has to do with that as well as more mystical thinking, and other places where time and space aren't the way we think about them. But unfortunately or fortunately, I played football, so I have my cleats in the ground and I try to like stay here and try to say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we got some problems here on Earth. And getting into those webs can can be intricate and takes a better mind than mine to really navigate them. So how do you apply that, let's say, spherical notion of nodes that are lights and maybe lamps pointing in some direction that probably, for my limited amount of capacity, are pointing in a direction in three-dimensional space, even though we can go to other places and say that's not. So, if you can, please apply your beautiful images to this reality here on Earth.
So last week I was in New York City, and it's one of my favorite places to view those kinds of patterns because you have so many people, and the way that people gather and the way that people move, if you just watch it, can kind of illustrate those energetic lines or those energetic movements. So I don't know if you know, but in kind of the center of New York City, there's this portal that they just opened between New York City and Dublin. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
So they set up this, it's like an art installation where they set up this camera. It's in the right across from the Flatiron Building. And so this camera views everybody who is standing in front of it, and it projects that view onto this giant round portal screen in Dublin, Ireland. And the one in New York projects Dublin, Ireland screen to the people in New York. So people are all gathering around this portal and like doing crazy things, including one crazy person who just was lewd and then it shut down the portal, unsurprisingly, on the New York side, not the Dublin side. Big shocker there. But so I was approaching to go see it, and I was at the stoplight and the crosswalk right before you cross over to where the Flatiron is. And as I was standing there, I stopped for a second, and there was a woman like selling mangoes, and there was a guy across the street waiting for a bus. And then like in the park, somebody was playing music. And something about that moment just caught me to stop and listen and observe. And when I did, I was struck again by how something was a nodal point in that particular place, and the cacophony of like the music player and the bus waiter and the person who was selling the mangoes, they weren't by accident all in those spaces at that particular time. There's something that feels like it drew them all being there for that particular moment. And like, 10 minutes later, the guy got on the bus, and maybe the mango seller pushed her cart away, but there was something energetic that pulled people often beyond their recognition into that particular space at that particular time. And I think about a lot of that in my work with families and in my work with communities and obviously with larger systems, which is that we are often pulled to certain patterns and certain spaces and certain ways beyond what we think our will is. And I often think about how that becomes encoded or connected for us in a way that creates the shape of our life.
You describe it as not voluntary for the people to show up there, but kind of pulled in that direction. The human brain only manages to process a limited amount of information cognitively, irrationally. So there's a lot that goes on subconsciously and preconsciously that we are not aware of, but we are affected by. By my saying that, how does that influence, or how would you elaborate, if that's what you can do, on the three people? It's a beautiful scene that you're describing. How those three people came to be at that place at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what brings people to the same place at the same time, except the fact that we have a proclivity for movement. And we think a lot of our movement is in our control or is our agency driven. But I have observed, both in myself and in others, that there's a whole layer of movement that there is no agency for, or actually where the agency is found is in a different place than what we think of as agency.
And where is this, or what is this different place, Bree?
Well, I would say that's Indra's web. So I would say that different place is something that is much larger than our awareness of ourselves. And I think that when you kind of go through experiences that drop the illusion that you are the primary actor in the entire game, you recognize that the game is one that is much more complex and intertwined than you believed before.
Well, what's a poor psychiatrist to do when he has to say it's not my agency anymore? What am I going to do with myself?
There's got to be a medicine for that. I feel certain that Valium would help.
Well, that's only if I'm anxious about it, but if I'm curious about it, then that's something else, which I am.
Ritalin. Ritalin.
Well, I prefer another kind of psychoactive for this situation, if you don't mind. Um, it, it, you're talking about the influences around and in us.
Yeah.
Uh, and I use the phrase human GPS, that we have the capacity to get where we need to be without knowing how we got there. And it's a little bit like GPS. You need to get someplace, and you don't even know you need to get there sometimes. And then you somehow wander around, going this way and that, and then you end up there. And this particular scene with the mango and the bus guy waiting for the bus and the musician playing, you gave us the impression that there was something harmonious about their gathering.
Mhm.
And that's why we're talking about it. It there was a feeling in you that you conveyed to me of a resonance. Could you tell us about that?
Totally. I mean, even as you say it that way, it makes me teary because there's like so much um, innocence in that resonance to me. It's that, and what I mean by innocence is not like innocent or guilty, but just this kind of mm, primal connection that is so clean and pure. And that's what it felt like on that street corner, was that I was just feeling the tenderness of the connection and the vulnerability of all of us within that kind of connection, that it feels to me very, very real about what life is.
Well, you managed to mention yourself finally as a participant as well as an observer in this. So why don't you tell us a little bit? Well, you told us something about how you felt about it, but you were not an observer. You were not just an observer. You were part of it as you're starting to talk about. So what did it feel like, in addition to the innocence you're describing and the harmonic resonance I think you're conveying as you talk about it? What other feelings were there in you, or thoughts as you were participating in this?
I would say there were the normal human feelings of the loudness of New York in that space. So just the awareness that there's a lot going on and you're managing all of that stimuli at once. And then there was the other transcendent piece of just seeing and perceiving that cacophony and that harmony and appreciating it tremendously, like marveling at it in some ways. And every time I go to New York City, it happens for me in different ways. But every time and I typically walk more than use transportation there. So I'm on the streets and I am always marveling at the way that reality moves in those spaces. Somebody was at, it reminded me of what you just said about like the GPS piece. So a couple of days ago, I did an online energetic clearing, and about once a month I do these clearings. And somebody texted me afterwards, and she was in the clearing, and she said, I have to share this with you. I was driving during the clearing and I got lost, and the GPS kept redirecting me. And she took a photo of the GPS map of its like crazy route. And she said that at the end of the clearing, she wound up at this like super incredible place that she never would have driven to otherwise. And she's like, I have to send this to you because I feel certain this was connected to the energy of the clearing. And yeah, it's just amazing to see those visual map representations of the way energy is always orchestrating, even though we don't necessarily see it.
I think you're also describing how, what what we mean, what we when we use the term energy, it's still a little ambiguous about what we mean by it. But how mechanical things can be influenced by our energy fields. And energy fields are really an important thing for all of us to pay attention to. I just talked with a psychiatrist, Rick Leskowitz, about biofields and how we feel them with each other and from each other. And it seems to me that you're pretty sensitive, if not very sensitive, to the energy fields of other people, partly because you also work with them and trying to help people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I would say I always was like that. But after that retreat in 2015, when I had an extremely mystical awakening that never really closed, that sight kind of got born in me. And so now it's just there all the time.
What's there all the time?
That sight, that perception of being able to see patterns or perceive layers of consciousness or layers of reality that are happening in a coexistent time.
Now that's the fruit. That's the food for psychosis. Uh, I mean, if how do you?
You just had to go there.
Very easy because that is how some people end up being psychotic because they start seeing what you're talking about, but they can't manage it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
How come you're able to manage this fairly complex pattern recognition and observation and participation?
Well, it took me about 9 years to manage it enough where I would say that I could live in multiple forms of it and still be grounded really, really solidly here. So it took a long time.
Yeah.
And and I was fortunate enough actually that a lot of the training that I had before I had that experience, both in psychology, in psychiatry, in systems, really assisted me in sorting what was happening. Like I had tools and frameworks that would help me discern which edges were safe and which were not so safe, so to speak. And then I also had a 20-year yoga and meditation practice. So I was very fortunate that when I experienced that kind of shattering and that kind of perceptual opening, I had the things I needed to be able to integrate it, even though it took a very long time.
As you well know, some people just fall into some version of that and destabilizes their lives.
Yes, and I've now spent the last 5 years working with a lot of those people and tracking why that destabilization happens more in certain conditions beforehand than others, and how to remedy a lot of them that don't seem like they can be remedied.
Could you give us an example?
Um, I have found that a lot of times that destabilization happens very significantly because there are very, very early formative patterns that are the basis of our ability to own and feel congruent in selfhood that have been interrupted, oftentimes for many generations. So people who have those kinds of formative binds or challenges with selfhood and the fullness of existence tend to do worse when that happens. Because what happens in that shattering is that you experience a whole different kind of existence, not personal existence, but the pulsation of life itself. And that tends to annihilate the personal sense of existence. And so the ability to tolerate that and incorporate it really has to do with the solidity and broadness of your defining of your own selfhood. And most of us are deeply immature in that area. And so I have found that people have to be matured while they are also then doing the integration work. And a lot of that has become the source of a lot of my work.
There's a lot in many mystical traditions, including the Kabbalistic one. You're supposed to be 40 before you undertake something. And what's happening these days is for various reasons, especially meditation and psychedelics. A lot of people
Yes.
don't know that meditation can really flip you off too, without any psychedelics, that you can do what I like to call ontological shock. Um,
Yes.
Ontological shock, ontology refers to your view of reality, like what's your worldview. And these experiences just crack it open, and you disappear when you don't have a you that can pull it back together again.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you
Yeah.
help people? Go ahead.
I was going to say, and we also don't really have frameworks or systems in the larger societal world around these kinds of eruptions and what it takes to really hold somebody in the integration phase of it. Because in some ways, they need certain practices and support, but they also really need to actually just let nature inside of them find its way. We don't have holding for that. We have systems of care, particularly in the world of psychotherapy, that seeks to quickly remediate and put people back together into some sort of form that feels like it fits in our societal reality. And these things are meant to break societal reality, not fit back in.
Well, Bree Greenberg. Well, now on your website, you say what you're just talking about. I intend, I'm going to put some emphasis in this on your website, which you can see underneath this video. You can get to it. I intend to Bree the Destroyer. I intend to destroy all your ideas about what's true, what's untouchable, and what is possible in the systems of relating which we accept as solid and unchangeable. So, what are you doing? Talking about making people crazy or something?
I mean, I think I'm talking about making people sane.
I think you are.
I think I'm talking about returning people to their own sanity.
I take issue with returning. Um,
Okay.
I think I'm still very future oriented, and I think it's an integration of their own past with what you might help them do that creates this new somebody that's a combination of what they've gone through as well as what they've missed that you're helping them to see.
Totally, totally, totally. Yes.
Well, well, I think we've talked about a bit about what the worldview you have that you try to bring people along with, along to. Um, but there's more to that. I mean, that's a powerful statement you make there, Bree. What else is there? What do you? It reminds me of 1930s serials with Flash Gordon, and Ming the Merciless was like the bad guy, and Ray was going to, I will get you, Flash Gordon, I will destroy you. There's a lot of that around. I mean, the destroyer is an archetype that's been around for quite a long time, and there's something I don't have the right word for it, but there's something about Bree the Destroyer that I have heard here that you have this intensity, and it feels to me, and that's me, like rage that's in you that comes through that statement. What about that?
So my feelings about rage are that there's probably more than two kinds, but the two kinds that I think about are personal rage and then more sacred rage. And sacred rage, I think about as being protector of truth. And I rarely use the word truth anymore because that word has been so, pollinated by so many things in our society that now it's hard to use any word because they've all been distorted. So I tend to use the term honesty because it just somehow feels more base to me. Um, but there's something about the intimacy, the relational intimacy, when there is emergent, clean honesty. And that is the derivation of emergent possibility. That most of the time where we're relating is kind of up here with projections, stories, layers of our own protection, whatever it is. And then we're seeking, to me, we're seeking this communion with something that feels much deeper than that, and something that I experience as being very simple and very succinct. And it's just what is honest in that moment. And I think we've become so habituated to this kind of relating that we're hungry or actually starving for the deeper kind of relating. And when I say relating, it's not just human relating. This is relating to everything. It's the way that we interpret and experience and respond to every phenomena that we encounter.
How does the word intimacy work for you here?
For me, the word intimacy feels like it connects to innocence. So intimacy to me is like the undefended, more, I don't like to use the word pure, but less distorted expression of somebody. And it relates very much to me for the erotic, the way that not the sexual erotic, but the pure sexual erotic, the way that creativity moves, the way that that energy likes to move through us as continually birthing, and of course also continually dying, but that there's a way that we are constantly creating, whether we intend to create or not. And so I like to remove the obstacles to that creation force creating at its most potent, because I believe that that's what gives us vibrancy. It's what makes us feel our aliveness and the aliveness of everything else.
Do synchronicities fit in with what you just described somehow?
100%. Yeah.
How is that? How is that?
Well, because I think in those moments when you experience synchronicity, you are experiencing the erotic, whether you realize it or not. You're experiencing those direct connections that are always there, even if you're up here. It's like it interrupts the up here-ness and reminds you of that web that is always there, that is the thing that I believe that we're very, very hungry for. What we are, not what we think we should be, but what we are.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people are afraid of what I'm calling intimacy, and I think you are too. Just honestly being what you are with what's there in the moment. Uh,
Yeah.
it's it's how come people are afraid of that?
Oh, I mean, I think one of the principal reasons is that we have hijacked that in our society. So we've built whole layers of fear around closeness and around humanity. So when you're in intimacy, you really feel the humanity of everything. You feel the consequence of the connection of your actions and something else. And I believe that we're like functioning up here away from that in a more objectified space that feels safer, but also feels way more guarded. And the lineage of doing that has created this layer, this thick layer of fear around going below it to this other thing. But that fear to me is very false. It's just there because it's been built up over time, like some magma layer, because we have been in avoidance for so long.
It's been encouraged by power and money as well, and that's that to keep us constrained and isolated.
Yeah.
The the this driving towards intimacy and synchronicity being directly, as you say, a momentary experience of the web that we're part of is really the kind of message I'm trying to be able to convey with trying to have people experience with awareness the meaningful coincidences that are fairly common in people's lives, but they don't notice them. So my thing is being able to try to get people to notice them and why. because it gets them connected to not only themselves, with themselves and with other people and with what's around us, the natural world around us. And you so clearly articulate that. You got some really good pictures, a little faster. Your video is a little faster than mine in being able to, and how you say this, and I can follow what you're talking about, and the images of what you're talking about. And there's an idea that I've been playing with that I want to try out with you because you've alluded to it somehow, with the layers and we miss each other, and we'd like to be able to connect. It's the idea that each of us creates movies about ourselves in reality. There's so much visual stuff going on. Movie like videos, this thing couldn't do this 10 years ago, and just we're in movies right now. You're playing a role and I'm playing a role, and now we've agreed to play complementary roles in each of our movies. Here you're doing that, I'm doing this, so we have an agreement. So there's a lot of times it's called projection. It's a lot of times, but I like the movie metaphor because you can see it really more clearly, where the one person wants the other person to be this role in my movie, and this one wants him or her to be this role in her movie or his movie. But they're not parallel. There's no agreement about how the movie's going to be operating. What do you think of that, and how do you think we might do something about that
Oh my God.
clash?
I think so much about that. I think so many things about that. I mean, um, I think that we're always in agreements, even when we're not in agreement. And so I think that some people would say it's a nervous system level, but I would say on a frequency or vibration level, that we sense one another and that we sense where the other person needs or wants us to be at that moment. And if we have still a lot of untouched experiences around power and domination and control within us, we will experience that person projecting us. Let's say they project us, or in their movie, we're the smaller one and they're the bigger one. We might very easily slip into that without meaning to, and then find ourselves there, much to our dismay and out of our control, to climb out of it. And the desire to climb out of it might make us fight, or might make us get smaller or be more diminutive. But there's a way that we're in reaction to that. And I would say we're in reaction to it because of our accumulated experiences that have been distorted around what power really is and who and what holds it. And everybody, at least in the West, everybody has so many layers of those distorted experiences. I mean, it's been going on for an awfully long time. And so I think it's funny that when you get in a space with two people who have pretty intact power inside of them, which means to me that you've metabolized a lot of that, or a good deal of that history around power imbalance and abuse. You have a certain kind of presence and intact power that's less shakable. When those people get into the same room and do the same dance, it doesn't have the resonance of trauma. It winds up having the resonance of play. And so the same dance could be happening, but the tone of the dance is completely different. And you can have somebody with a lot of intensity, or two people with a lot of intensity, and they can go at it, but there's this underlying sense of respect and mutuality, because they can feel each other still being in their own camp. Nobody abandons themselves because of the power imbalance. And so I think this abandoning of oneself to too much power or too little power is the dance we've been groomed into, that makes us feel unnaturally fearful and vulnerable of one another.
Man, do I feel how much work you have done in keeping yourself intact. Oh, wow. I that just comes right over. Uh, it-
I've studied a lot of power dynamics.
I guess you have, and you've given up a lot of power, and you've probably, from what I can tell, as Bree the Destroyer, also had a lot of power, and uh, and that's a different form of power or anger than we were talking about. I like the sacred anger that you were talking about before, and sacred power too. I think they go around along together because it has something to do with doing something better and being honest and intimate and willing to be yourself. But so important to Bree Greenberg, I can tell at this moment, I've been telling for a while, that is you got to hold on to yourself here. You got to know what that thing is. And you just stand there. And it's it's an important lesson. It's one that you are training other people to be able to do. I can see it. I can feel just even the way you're talking. I'm kind of like, oh, where am I in this? I mean, which one is this? I mean, I can feel the outline of the kind of solidity of a sense of self that you are drawing here for me and for our audience.
Yeah. Yeah, that verticality is so, when it happens, it's so erotically exciting to us. Like when we come in contact with verticality between sources, the generativity is so high. It's incredible because everybody is bringing what I call their tone, and you can really feel that tone. And then that's where you get that symphony. That's where the excitement happens around creation, not just orchestrating you, but you orchestrating within creation, like in real time. That's the stuff I absolutely like live for.
Oh yeah. What you're calling the tone, I call energy signature, that each
Yes.
one of us has an energy signature, and to be able to vibrate at that signature, it's like your fingerprint, is the basis of making stuff happen. And so much of it has to do with not trying to get somebody else to be in your movie the
That's
way
it.
you want them to be.
That's it. That's it. You have to give up all of that. And we really, really struggle with giving that stuff up because we have a sense that that is identity. You know what I mean? That's safety. That's identity. That's reality. We don't understand that that's not reality at all. That's a projected reality that we have been living in for a very long time. And I think that's where people really struggle when they have those big openings, is they have to, those realities begin to dissolve and they don't have a sense yet of tangible reality again.
The reality I think you're talking about is the reality to maneuver someone else into your movie.
Yes. Yes.
Giving that up. I mean, it's freedom. It is
Yes.
freedom.
Yes.
It is. Yeah, I'm still doing that, but I got better at it with a relationship that's now 99% over. I think maybe a little bit left, but it's mostly over. And I walked into to being controlled by her on purpose, of being
Mm.
her servant in a lot of ways, and I liked it because it was fun and I could interact with her. But then, and almost like one day, it was like, hey, I don't want to keep doing this anymore. This is not mutual. This is not reciprocal.
Mhm.
And I'm not doing this. So I said, I'm stepping back and see if she does anything. It's been 2.5 months. I haven't heard from her, and that was the relationship. It was all my doing, and the movie was great because I learned a lot from it. It's not to be
Yes.
These are not to be dismissed entirely, and
Totally.
and I've been in a lot worse movies than that one. I walked out of this one pretty intact. Other times, not so
Not
much.
so much.
Not so much.
Yep. Yeah, 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 yeah. You built intactness through all of the not so muches. So this time you held on.
I,
Yeah, it's tricky.
yeah, it's tricky, and you gotta have some idea about what's happening,
Yes.
and what your limits are. And this is where boundaries are so important. And energy boundaries, know your biofield, know how. And I was giving up my energy for her. And I got something in return for a while, but it wasn't equal. And then
Yeah.
it was like, okay, that's enough. And the boundaries, my boundaries got stronger, and my sense of my energy signature, my honest self became stronger. And that's why I can recognize what you're doing.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think we can enjoy those. Like you're saying, there's so much to learn from being in those dynamics if you let them teach you. And I think there's a piece of enjoyment in both sides of that, like the domination and the sub role play, basically, of those power dynamics. But I think for most of us, at a certain level of maturity, you want the reciprocity. You want the dance of those dynamics, not the homeostasis of them, where one person is constantly subservient. It gets old. It gets boring, frankly.
It gets painful too.
Yes.
It's a lot of feelings come up, and to be able to not do the romance movie, which is
Mm-hmm.
so popular.
Yeah.
I listened to music in the 50s, and I can sing a lot of songs from those days, and they're all romantic songs, and they're illusions that have a nice feeling in it, but it's more like a drug than the honest vulnerability and being straight, and the joy of not trying to get her to dance with me. If she doesn't want to, that's her business.
Yes. Totally. Totally, 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 totally.
As in totally?
Yes,
As in totally?
completely. Yes.
I believe you said as in totally. Okay, so I
As
got
in
that.
totally.
Uh,
Yes.
and right now, because I have changed fairly well in the last 2 months, somebody I met 2 or 3 months ago uh, is seems to be trying to induce me to be in a relationship with her. And I like being friends with her then, and it was a little romance going on kind of feeling, but I matured relatively quickly, and I'm not interested now because she's trying to maneuver me in a way that I don't want to be.
Yeah.
I can be friends, but I mean, coming up and before I do a talk and kissing me in public, and when I wasn't paying attention, so she got it in there. That's the kind of role inducing act that's kind of forced, and
Yes.
I don't want to be forced into stuff anymore, and I don't want to force anybody else into something they don't want to do.
Totally. That is it. It's the presence of force, whether that is through manipulation or through direct pressure or through threat, whatever it is the presence of force that we become deeply allergic to as we mature.
Hmm.
We just do not want to engage in any kind of relational structure that contains that because it is so dishonest. It's so performative.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we're coming to the end of this show now, so we're gonna have to wrap it up in a minute or two. Is what would you like to leave little old me with, as well as our audience? If if any of you have lasted this long, I mean, most people stop at the end of 5 minutes or 9 minutes or something. This is an hour thing, but if you're still here, this is what Bree wants to tell you.
I mean, I think the thing that is so has always stuck with me in the last decade or so of my life is how in all situations there are more permutations of possibility than we recognize. And that speaks to that web like nature of things, that when we are just drawn over and over again, repeatedly to one course or one pattern, we begin to believe that that's all existence is for us. And there's a whole bunch of DSM diagnoses that describe the experience when that has happened to you over and over again. And I think it's, when I say on my website, I intend to destroy all of your ideas about what is solid, real, possible, whatever I say, it is what I am saying in that, which is that in each given moment, floating around us are billions of possible ways that we can respond, that we can be responded to, paths that we can take. It is so much more available than we experience because we have been so falsely narrowed. And so that always feels to me like one of the most important takeaways is that your experience, how you experience your life, is more narrow than what is actually true.
And what is actually possible. I
Yes.
think true is something else, as you were talking about. But to me, it's the multiple universe thing.
Yes.
It is probably at least in part derived on what you're just saying, because we can go in different directions right here on Earth, and they become different worlds when you have this way or that way. And my favorite these days has been having better boundaries than I had before. And that there's always an option to have loose boundaries, but there are better options than some that we might be taking. So when you get to those forks in the roads and there's possibilities, there are better ones and worse ones for you. And I
Yes.
think that's important to keep in mind.
Yes, and sometimes the way we try to sort what's better or worse is from our mind narrative, and that doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story. And so I tell people a lot of times it's important to see how your movement pattern is around it, like, and where that movement pattern is coming from. So for a lot of us, we will habitually do the thing that feels like it's going to get us most accepted, right? We'll make the choice that feels like it gives us the most belonging currency, because belonging currency feels so important. But that may not be the actual true move for us. The true move may be actually breaking that form of belonging currency in that moment, because our system is ready for a different experience of ourselves. And so we have to learn how to discern those different ways and markers in our particular system. But once we get a knack for it, we start doing it, and life begins to feel more relational rather than more so suffocating and so imposed.
And more expanded, I'd add.
And more expanded.
My particular one right now with this woman I was telling you about who kissed me before that I gave a talk, it was like my movie has been not to hurt her feelings, whoever the her was.
Yeah.
And being able to tolerate, I want to get off the phone, I had enough kind of thing.
Yeah.
And be able to tolerate that is like, that's getting to be an old movie. And
Yeah.
that's why I like these movie things, because I like watching football films with me running for touchdowns. So I got into the movie business fairly young in high school by watching myself making touchdowns. So and there's a lot of movies around. So it's like, that's just even talking with you about this just solidifies that a little bit more about that's her trip.
Yes.
She self-confessed has broken a lot of hearts.
Oh boy.
So that helps the boundaries stay even stronger. I mean, it's all in the wonderful game that we're playing here, and you've got a nice view of it, I have to say. So I very much appreciate being able to converse with you, Bree, about these things. Thank you very much.
Likewise, thank you. It was really fun.
It's really fun.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.